What can Starmer do to win you over? That's what we're asking. Earlier, Jeremy was asking viewers to score Keir Starmer out of 100 to mark his 100 days in office. And as you can see, well, there didn't seem to be very many high votes. On average, the score was 30, giving him 30%. So we want to know what you think his next move should be after a controversial few months dominated by rows over freebies and winter fuel payments. Get your calls in for this one now. Cherry, I'm going to start with you. Are you going to give Keir Starmer a high score? What would you give him out of 100?
I am, because I'm hugely optimistic about this government. I'd go 75. But if he wants that top spot, for me, it would be investing properly in women's health. Women have to wait for sometimes up to 2 years to get a consultation appointment, which means their diagnosis. It is a matter of life and death. Women's health is hugely underfunded. There's not enough research. There's 4 over-the-counter remedies for erectile dysfunction. There's not a single one for UTIs. Endometriosis takes on average about 10 years to diagnose, which some women end up infertile. It is so poorly dealt with. There is such a huge gender health gap. I want them to invest in. Dame Leslie Reagan is the health czar, the women's health czar. She needs to be able to do what she wants to do. The Conservative government promised lots of funds. Where are those funds? We need women's health hubs, so it's simple. Women can get health provision from the beginning, whether it's contraception, help with your teenage years, right through to your childbearing years, right through to menopause and beyond. One simple health hub, rather than going all over different places, which costs the NHS so much money. It's not connected.
And you want these rolled out across the country?
Yes.
OK, Wilfred, what about you? What are you scoring?
I'm going to boast
Keir
now.
Starmer?
I'm going to boast now, because on Tuesday I was at an event where he was speaking, so I was invited to... Exactly.
Little name drop there to start the show.
I've seen him up close. I was at the event which we're celebrating.
Has that given him more points or less points?
It actually has given him more points, because I must say that I was quite impressed. So the image you have of him, and I'm a Tory, believe it or not, I'm a Tory, and the image you have of him on television is very, very different to when you actually could see him up close. So I was quite impressed. And I also think, look, it is unfair to start scoring people when they haven't even been in power for 100 days. It'd be like me employing
but tomorrow it'll be 100 days. It's not that unfair.
100 days is too early. I just think that what you have to do is that you have to understand it takes people time, and we have to start to be patient in this country to give people time to get it right, because it's a very, very different process when you're in opposition and you're suddenly in power, and then you face the absolute reality of all the challenges that you have. And so there are going to be things that you are going to get wrong. There are things that you're going to have to reconsider. So I do not think it's helpful to start being critical of the mistakes that is made so far.
We don't have to be critical, but we can observe.
Yeah, we can observe.
And Keir Starmer has been in power for 100 days, or will be for 100 days tomorrow. You're an employer. You have presumably a period of time when you just employ somebody where you're looking at what they're doing, a sort of interim period. It's normally 6 months, isn't it? If Keir Starmer was an employee, would you be delighted by his work so far, or would you be thinking, I'm not so optimistic?
No, sometimes when you employ somebody, you could tell within a week it was a big mistake.
OK, so how are you feeling about Keir Starmer so far?
I feel enough that I would give him more time. I don't think he's been reckless. But there are things that they are talking about which makes me wince. I just think actually they go against the core of my sort of principles.
Like what?
Well, in terms of anything to do with, you know, what they're doing with the renters, for example, anything to do with actually that a person who is sick, the person you employ, and they can have sickness benefits from day one. That, you know, from an employee's perspective, that is absolutely sort of crazy. There's a feeling that actually the unions who are back into bed with the Labour Party, they're actually pushing them for things that will not work for employers. And a lot of the strategies they've come up with, I do not see anything for business. So I'm really waiting to see what happens at that budget. And where I feel about this government is going to depend what they do for business, because if they do not put growth at the top of the agenda, it's going to make it extremely difficult for those of us running a business.
And when it comes to growth, you think they need to focus on small businesses?
Exactly.
Cherry, you're quite optimistic. What is it Keir Starmer's done right so far that's won you over?
I do think that so much of politics is perception. I think getting rid of the winter fuel payment was such a terrible, terrible idea. What is such a strange decision to do that at the beginning. However, I do think the early prisoner release scheme is a good thing. Those prisons are so overcrowded. I think
even though prisoners were released that weren't meant to be.
Well, only 75. Was it 37 prisoners?
That's more than I'd like to
That
be
is a
out.
horrible mistake. I totally accept that. But something had to be done. They're overcrowded. The conditions are awful. If we want people to be rehabilitated and be released into society, you cannot have them living in those conditions. Something had to be done. A difficult decision had to be made, and they made that difficult decision. I feel like the Conservatives faffed about with that decision. I do think the Labour government have been strong on that, and that's good. I think the free school breakfast clubs, that's been put back in place. That's amazing. In April, so many children will have access to breakfast at school, which is really important.
But then he's keeping the 2-child cap.
Yes, I mean, the problem is that they've been left with a huge debt. They have to make savings somewhere, and I do think they've had to make some really difficult decisions. I don't think the winter fuel cap with the allowance was a good place to make that saving right at the beginning of your term.
Well, I think actually you need to be brutal when you're in.
Brutal with pensioners, though.
I don't think that was the right area. I agree, you've got to make big decisions, like with the prisoner releases. That was important to do. But with pensioners, the perception of that was terrible. That was always going to go badly.
But if you want to do something like that, you've got to do it at the beginning so you have time to be able to make up for it. But I just think we should not underestimate the job that needs to be done. And there are really, really tough decisions to be made. The thing that concerns me is a lot of the policies, a lot of the things they're coming up with are going back to a bygone age. And it's as though it's the resurgence of old-fashioned socialism that does not seem to fit into the sort of the times that we're living in.
There have been successes. Like they finally made a deal with the junior doctors. Those strikes were devastating to our NHS.
Yeah, but
they've made that deal. The Conservatives couldn't do that in the whole time. They've come into power and they've done that really quickly, and everyone seems to be on a better
Well, apart
position.
from the nurses, but
all the public sector. So what's happened is that, we've gone back, we've given the public sector pay rises, and it's been that. Is that going to come back to haunt them? Is that going to be in a year's time, 2 years' time, we're going to be having these guys demanding more pay rises?
But they had to make a decision, like you said. Tough decisions had to be made. They've done that, and the Conservative government just couldn't find a way to resolve it. But they've done that very quickly.
OK, let's go to our callers then and see how you feel about Keir Starmer, how he's doing, what you want him to see, what you want him to do next. Dennis from Portsmouth, you're up first. What do you want to see Keir Starmer do?
Well, I'd like him to sound a bit more like a prime minister. He's so unimpressive to me. We've had Labour prime ministers before who've sounded impressive. I've never voted Labour myself, but it sounds like we're in for a perpetual party political broadcast. The last 14 years weren't chaos, quite honestly. It's absolute nonsense. On Newsnight last night, we had two of his lot on, and they just rubbished the Tories from start to finish.
We did have quite a few prime ministers during the last 14 years, and so is chaos the wrong word to describe the Tory party's time in power? How would you describe it?
Well, they had problems, didn't they? They had the pandemic, the COVID business, the pandemic. Mm-hmm. They had the start of a major war in Europe. Mm-hmm. We know they left problems. We can't deny that, can we? But all right, they've done some good things since they've been in. But here's a new broom, quite honestly. What's it going to be like after a few years when they've got tired of the job? They dislike the Tories more than they like the rest of us, quite honestly. OK,
so you think they're focusing too much on bashing the previous government rather than working out what they actually want to do. Well, let's say they take a listen to you, Dennis, and their ears are focused on what you're about to say. What would you like to tell them? What do you want to see them do next? How would they be able to win you over?
Well, the only thing they could do for me, quite personally, at my age, I'm 80 now. I've got a youthful countenance, though. I'd like to see them stop speeding on the roads. That's what they could do for me.
OK, clamp down on speeding.
I have trouble crossing the roads. That's all they could do for me.
Dennis, that seems like something that they could focus on that would be good for everyone. Dennis, thank you very much for your call, although that might be more council-led, I imagine. I don't know who gets the money for that when the fines come in. Sandra from Essex, what's your view when it comes to the government? What do you want to see Keir Starmer do next?
Well, I'm a bit enthusiastic here, and my view of what can Starmer do for people like me and many others is to reinstate the pensioners' fuel money in the budget. Reason being, I'm sure he realises that people on state pension have to pay towards their, say, optician glasses, but not an eye test. They have to pay for their NHS dentist towards it. I am one of those people on state pension. They have to pay towards their rent, their council tax.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking that what this man has practically done is not looked into this very serious, haven't taken into account that he was only in Parliament, say, less than a week, and picked on the pensioners first. I actually think it's so disrespectful.
You know, even if it was a good policy, it has certainly not been good for their PR, that's for sure. Lots of people incredibly angry about it. But some people, Wilfred, do you think this was a hard decision that he had to make?
Well, it is a hard decision to make. And we also need to be challenging what retirement means in our day and age. I think a lot of people retire too early. I think that actually I would be far more dramatic in terms of how can we get people working up to a much older age than they are. So the more we could get people working, the more growth, the better it is going to be for our society.
Which might be fine if you do something you love or you work in an office, but if you're a bricklayer or something that is really labour intensive, I think working past 65
but work,
might be
you see, my philosophy about work is that we all need to try and find something that we love. Otherwise, you could understand why people want to retire if they spend their life doing
that is gorgeous philosophy, but
No,
that's not really possible for many people.
I absolutely believe it is possible for people to do what they love. Otherwise, you can't wait to give up work because it's been a survival drudgery.
Which I'd say is possibly most of the population, which is why
I can't accept
these
that
policies
most
come
of
in,
people are just...
people are upset.
Not everyone is as vibrant
hating.
as you, Wilfred.
I just want to get another call in. Fred from Essex, what's your view when it comes to Keir Starmer and what he could do to win you over? What would that be?
Right, well, get out of power quick.
Oh, so you've been really disappointed, Fred. What's upset you the most?
Well, I've been a Labour voter all my life, and so have most of my family. But I went on the telephone on Monday, and after answering about 100 questions, and they said, you've got to get pension credit before you can get your winter fuel allowance.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yep.
And they asked me so many, have you got an offshore bank account? I'm in my 80s.
Okay, well, I mean, some people in their 80s probably do have offshore accounts.
Yeah,
maybe not the ones that are calling up for pension credits. Fred, so if he did a U-turn on the winter fuel allowance, could that win you back?
Yes, it would do.
Okay, so a little bit more to help the pensioners would win you your vote again?
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to most of my neighbours, and they're disgusted.
Yeah,
And during the interview, and I must have answered about 100 questions, which lasted for over an hour. He wanted to know how much money I had in the house. And I said, well, I've got a few bob in the wallet. And he said, well, how much have you got in your wallet?
yeah, I mean...
I thought it was disgusting.
Maybe they could limit the amount of red tape involved around applying for these pension credits, but at least you got to speak to somebody on the phone and didn't have to do it online. That's another criticism that we get. Fred, thank you very much for your call. Before we move on, you've been sending us your photos of last night's Northern Lights. Thank you very much for sending them in. So Julie from Flintshire, North Wales, has sent us this one. Oh my goodness, that is spectacular. It looks like a painting. This is from Danielle in Pontefract in West Yorkshire. absolutely spectacular it was. Even my son noticed actually on the way home from nursery.